Hello, good morning, welcome. I am Samuel Trapp coming to you live from the freezing cold Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio, where I've got my parka on. I've got several layers of warmth, and it's just not working. Well, there you have it. That is where we are today. We have a lot of interesting topics to get into today. I wanted to start with, just because I thought it would be fun, a bit of an analysis, if you want to call it that, on the old Trumpster. And then I'm going to weave into, the news of the week. I thought I'd do it in reverse, but I don't know. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the world. But I think, like the hospital ship. Trump is sending a hospital ship to Greenland. How exciting is that? Yeah, these people need a hospital ship because they don't have anywhere to take care of people, basically. And why not send out a ship and take care of these poor Greenlanders? And then he was rejected by Jens Fredrik Nielsen. He rejected the president's offer to boost the island's health care with a medical boat. It's a mixed up, muddled up, shook up world, except for Lola, of course. But here we are. Very strange events going on. I wanted to go into... So, according to the Supreme Court opinion, I went ahead and read it. Although that isn't my bag anymore, but I still try to pay attention every now and again. If I don't drink warm coffee, it'll turn into an ice cube while I'm sitting in here, so I have to drink it before it hardens, But according to the Supreme Court opinion, the court did two big things at once in this wonderful case file, which, let's see, Supreme Court of the United States, Learning Resources, Inc., and others, versus Trump, Donald J., one each, President of the United States, and others. There's a certiorari before judgment to the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. Argued November 5, 2025, and decided February 20. So you can talk about, I always like to but there are such long questions presented that they are even, and it's, let's see if I can read them all. I just wanted a short synopsis. And the trouble is all these guys are very proud of themselves, and so therefore they will write these dissertations that drag on and on and on. And they can't just tell you what the hell they're doing, and it's depressing. So these things go on for days. So the question presented is whether the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, otherwise known as the IEEPA, authorizes the president to impose tariffs, C-91 statutes, 1626. Shortly after taking office, President Trump sought to address two foreign threats: the influx of illegal drugs from Canada, Mexico, and China. Presidential Proclamation number 10886. The president determined that drug influx had created a public health crisis and that the trade deficit had led to the hollowing out, quoted, of the American manufacturing base and undermined critical supply chains. President declared a national emergency as to both threats, deeming them unusual and extraordinary, and invoked his authority under the IEEPA to respond. So he said he was using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. He imposed tariffs to deal with each threat. As to the drug trafficking, the president imposed a 25% duty on most Canadian and Mexican imports and a 10% duty on most Chinese imports. As to trade deficit reciprocal tariffs, the president imposed a duty on all imports from all trading partners of at least 10%, with dozens of nations facing higher rates. Since imposing each set of tariffs, the president has issued several increases, reductions, and modifications. Petitioners in learning resources and respondents in VOS selections filed suit alleging that IEEPA does not authorize reciprocal or drug trafficking tariffs. The learning resource plaintiffs, two small businesses, sued in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. That court denied the government's motion to transfer the case to the U.S. Court of International Trade, CIT, and granted plaintiffs' motion. God, there's such small type. Hello, how's the family? How do I get to see it larger? This is, not my computer. Got it. It's just driving me bananas. At any rate, now I can't see where I was. Let's see. The plaintiffs, and granted the plaintiffs' motion for preliminary injunction, concluding that IEEPA did not grant the president the power to impose tariffs. 5 other plaintiffs and 12 states sued in the Court of International Trade. That court granted summary judgment for the plaintiffs. And the Federal Circuit, sitting en banc, affirmed in relevant part, that means en banc means everybody, the whole court, not just 3, concluded that IEEPA's grant of authority to regulate importation did not authorize the challenged tariffs, which are unbounded in scope, amount, and duration. You know what? That actually makes sense. Strange. The government filed a petition for certiorari to the... I'm having trouble reading because the type is so small. The government filed a petition for certiorari in VOS selections, and the learning resources plaintiffs filed a petition for certiorari before judgment. The court granted the petition and consolidated the 2 cases, rightly so. IEEPA does not authorize, this is the ruling. IEEPA, International Economic Emergency Powers Act, does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. The judgment in number 24-1287 is vacated and the case remanded with instructions to dismiss for lack of jurisdiction. The judgment in number 25-250 is affirmed. Now, I don't remember which one is which, but they dismissed one, and I believe they said that the Court of Appeals didn't have, the district court did not, but the Court of International Trade did. I don't think it's vice versa, but I think it's that. Sorry, I read it late last night. At any rate, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, the Chief Justice delivered the opinion in court with respect to Parts 1 and 2A. I'm not going to read this whole judgment to you. It's too freaking small. I can't see it. And I don't know what I've done here to jack it all up, but I can't see it. And it won't let me enlarge. So anyway, that is the ruling that we are talking about here today. And I'm going to cover a little bit of some of that for you, if we will, because I've got a lot of other topics to get into as well. But I think I was going to finish with this, but I decided to reverse it. And what I thought I would do was talk about the dissenting views first, okay? And what the dissenters said, then they gave 3 broad pillars. The 3 of the 3 dissenting justices, they said that IEEPA's language is broader than the majority admits. Okay, so the majority said, no, it's not that broad. Doesn't say it. If the court wanted to say it, or if the legislature wanted to say it, they would have said it, and they didn't say it. Now that's something that I typically say. I'm a strict. How do you want to put this? Not that I matter, but I'm a strict constructionist, okay, of what is what I believe that the Constitution requires, what I believe everyone, I believe in strict lanes. You stay in your lane. The legislature does something. It grants power. You hear me lecture about this crap all the time. That the legislature, legislative branch grants authority. They create the laws on behalf of the people. The executive branch blesses that creation of the law, and they have the right to say no. But once those two have spoken, the law is, okay? And then the interpretation of that law goes to the court. And if the court comes back and says, look, you guys jacked it all up, you either didn't give the authority you said you were given, or you gave too much authority. I'm pretty strict in that. I want it to say it. I don't even like the fact that sometimes they extend it to say, well, when the legislature was discussing this on the House floor and the Senate chambers, they discussed this part. I'm not strict. I want it in the text. I want to say here, because you can discuss a lot of crap, and then it never ends up in your contract, If you're sitting there talking to a contractor comes to your house and you say, geez, I need a new foundation poured, and while he's there, you talk about, I like this foundation idea and I want to do it, but you know what I really want? I want a new pad done over here where I'm going to put a shed, so I want that too. If you don't put the shed in the contract, you're not getting it. That's just all there is to it. That strict construction. It's got to be in the wording of the contract. And by the way, this is how the U.S. screws the rest of the world, and says, well, we didn't say that because it never ended up in the treaty. So, and notably, and I don't want to go back to my constant bitching, but it goes, George W. Bush can say, NATO won't go another inch to the east in 1991, all he wants, and say that. And then everybody goes, wait a minute, that's not there's no treaty to that effect. We just said it. That was a politician saying stuff. Politicians say stuff all the time. You can't believe a word they say. I mean, everybody knows that. What are you talking about? There should be a treaty. And if you really wanted it, you would have asked for it in a treaty. And so therefore, you didn't want it. And therefore, NATO's in Ukraine on your doorstep. That's your fault, not ours. That's how people argue. And it's a legitimate argument. If you really wanted it, why didn't you fight for it? But, I don't agree with it, that you should posture because we're supposed to be able to believe the word of the king. But you can't. Remember that. You can't trust the word of the king. So at any rate, the IEEPA, according to the justices that dissented, they say the language is broader than the majority admits. And they say the dissent emphasizes that it authorizes the president to regulate and prohibit transactions involving foreign commerce during declared national emergency. And he declared a national emergency. He has the discretion to do that. They say argue that tariffs are functionally a form of regulation. And they alter the conditions under which imports enter the country. They change the price structure. They shape trade flow. And from that perspective, a tariff isn't necessarily a tax in the narrow revenue-raising sense. And this I like. It can also be viewed as a regulatory mechanism designed to influence conduct. Okay, and the president is supposed to influence conduct. Now, more importantly to me is this is, the majority hung their hat on it's a tax, therefore it belongs in more strict regulatory language of the legislative branch, right? But the dissent says, well, but no, this is a regulation. The president can put that in and try to design, or try to influence people's behavior by putting in these things. So the dissent's point is this: if Congress gives the president the power to regulate foreign commerce during emergencies, it's artificial to carve tariffs out of that category just because they generate revenue. In their view, the majority is drawing a formal line that Congress did not draw. Either way, in my book, the Congress wasn't detailed enough in what they were going to do, and that's scary because they got these 10,000-page documents that they create, and there's not enough detail in them. Okay, second point: Constitution gives Congress power over tariffs, but Congress can delegate that power. The dissent does not deny that tariffs are rooted in Congress's Article I power. What it disputes is the idea that Congress failed to delegate that authority here. And so Congress enacted IEEPA knowing it concerned foreign economic threat. It used sweeping language. It didn't carve out tariffs as prohibited. It did not restrict the president to asset freezes only. And so the dissent argues that when Congress used broad language in the context of foreign economic emergency, court should not narrow it unless statute clearly excludes the disputed power. They view the majority's approach as judicial narrowing of an intentionally flexible emergency statute. Yeah, I could see that point. Yep. And deference in foreign affairs. This one, the one I support the most is probably this one. So the dissent stresses that the traditional judicial posture in matters of foreign policy and national security is this: courts give the executive branch wide latitude. So when the president declares a national emergency tied to foreign conduct, the dissent believes courts should hesitate before second-guessing a chosen economic response, especially when Congress has provided a statutory framework for such emergency economic control. But from this point, the majority isn't interpreting a statute, it is constraining the executive's flexibility. And by the way, taking over his power in foreign affairs. And you make that argument. Now that is an argument I can get behind, okay? And so the major questions doctrine skepticism, although the majority doesn't scream major question doctrine in giant letters, its logic tracks that line of reasoning. The dissent is wary of using that doctrine too aggressively because it warns that the court can overuse major questions to strike down executive actions that operate broadly within his delegated authority. So the dissent sees the majority as rewriting the statute, and that they don't like. I don't like, under the banner of separation of powers. So they turned it into something constitutional. And so, what they're saying is Congress writes the tax law. Emergency powers are not blank checks. That's the majority. The dissent says, wait a minute, Congress delegated a broad swath of powers, and that it should include these economic ones. Courts shouldn't micromanage such emergency economic tools. So that disagreement isn't an academic deal. It's two very different models of executive power. Model one, strict separation, clear delegation, limited emergency interpretation, which generally I support, okay? But then Model 2, I'm actually somewhere in between the two here. It depends on the issue. But Model 2, flexible delegation, broad executive discretion in foreign economic crises, that's how it goes. So Trump praises the dissenters, and he says they're strong, patriotic, understanding. He characterized the majority as timid, politically influenced. From a structural standpoint, what he prefers is the second model, of course, maximum executive flexibility in trade and economic confrontations. And that preference itself is part of the instability narrative that I wanted to talk about in today's show. So I wanted to talk about this from the point of view of allies and tariff authorities. I did want to go into what the actual document said as far as the procedural punchline, because what the court actually said, the majority. So I started with the minority. And what the Supreme Court ruling actually said, number one, procedure. The case came up from Federal District Court, D.C. Supreme Court said challenges like this, where you're essentially contesting tariffs, duties, and related trade, belong in the specialized court of international trade, not a general district court. So the court vacated that judgment and sent it back with instructions to dismiss. Like, we're sending it back, and you're going to enter an order in keeping with what we're telling you, and we're telling you you don't have jurisdiction, and these must be taken before the Court of International Trade. So we're ordering you to dismiss this case. So that case will be dismissed. So the procedural outcome is dismissible. It isn't Trump wins and plaintiffs win. It's you filed it in the wrong spot. And the substantive holding was that IEEPA is not a tariff gun. So while booting the case on jurisdiction, the court said a clear substantive rule, very clearly, IEEPA does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. The end. The reasoning is straightforward and text, structure, history, according to them. What IEEPA actually authorizes is it lets the president investigate, regulate, or prohibit certain transactions and property interests tied to a foreign country or national emergency. The court's logic is this. These aren't emergency economic controls, blocking, licensing, freezing, restricting, not taxing. A tariff isn't a regulation, it's taxation by another name. So the court is treating tariffs and duties as a tax. They operate on importers, raise revenue, function as a branch of taxing power. That matters because the Constitution puts taxing and tariff policy fundamentally in Congress's hands. And if Congress wanted to hand the executive something that sweeping, it would do so clearly and not via vague emergency verbs like regulate. So the major question flavor, which they were talking about, is the court's instinct is we're not reading a sweeping global tariff authority into IEEPA's general language. So when an agency or the president claims a power of vast economic and political significance, the court expects a clear statement from Congress. Put it in the contract. IEEPA, global tariff wall, fails that test on a plain reading and on constitutional structure. And the historical practice cuts against it. They said the presidents have used IEEPA for a lot of tools, but not for tariffs. And that absence matters, is what they say. So the court's message is basically this. Emergency powers let you choke off transactions and access. They don't let you print a tax schedule. And so what this means in practice, the decision didn't kill tariffs as a policy tool. It killed one pathway. The attempt to use IEEPA as the legal basis for the broad tariffs, that they can't use. So I read something from a person named Inu Manak, and how the tariffs could survive anyway is what it was called. And this person's from the Council on Foreign Relations, okay? So, yep, the court knocked out IEEPA, but Congress has already delegated other tariff authority to other ways over decades. And those can be used, though they are narrower, more procedural, and have their own built-in limits, right? So this replacement that she said, I don't, I don't know, he, she, I didn't look it up, but the author, let's call it the author. The CFR piece lays out the replacement toolbox, and it's basically a patchwork quilt rather than one, sweeping broom. So here are the four pathways that that Trumpster can keep these up. Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. It's a quick baseline, but it expires. This one allows tariffs of up to 15% for 150 days, unless Congress extends that, if there's a large and serious balance of payments deficit. This one's fast, and it doesn't require a big formal investigation. It's temporary and has to be applied uniformly, not targeted country by country, right? So you could slap on a short-term, across-the-board tariff, but it's on a timer. And you can't punish Canada today, Germany tomorrow, stuff like that. And I think it is applied uniformly. It's supposed to be applied uniformly. I haven't pulled the actual section of it yet or reviewed it, but that's what the article said. And I think that's correct, but I haven't reviewed it. Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, the national security lever. This one allows tariffs and quotas when imports threaten national security, but it requires an investigation and a Commerce Department recommendation. So the CFR notes, Code of Federal Regulations, notes that it's broad because national security is not tightly defined, and there's no statutory cap on the tariff rate, but it's in sections, sectoral. Like, I can do it on, oil products. I can do it on grains, whatever. But it doesn't create a universal everything tariff like 122 Trade Act of 1974 does. And that one it can't be targeted country by country. But this one allows you to target, but it also requires an investigation of the Commerce Department. So this is how you tariff steel, aluminum, auto, copper, so on. It's big impact, but it can't be a universal baseline. So there's the third one. That one is Section 301 of the Trade Act of 74, the Unfair Trade Practices Machine. This one is investigation, findings, and then remedies that include tariffs. It's powerful, can be put into place for years, and has been used heavily against China. But it's slower and process-heavy up front, and it's country-specific rather than universal. Okay, so if you want a long war, this is how you get it. Section 301 of the Trade Act of 74. Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930, the never used but legally spicy option. This allows tariff up to 50% on goods from countries that unreasonably discriminate, is the word, against U.S. trade. Code of Federal Regulation says major ambiguity, about what fact-finding is required, and emphasizes that it's basically untested and would almost certainly be litigated. This one is a broken glass statute, dramatic, uncertain, and lawsuit bait. So the bottom line is that there's no exact replacement for Trump's sweeping IEEPA approach. So any rebuild is a patchwork, and the patchwork itself sustains global uncertainty because partners can't predict what's coming next or how stable. I wanted to go into what Trump said about this, but I think I'm going to leave that for the end of where I go today. And I'm going to go begin at the beginning. And what I did was, that's in Russian. We're going to skip that part. La, la, la. I thought I created a different pathway for this, but maybe not. Okay. So basically, I wanted to talk about Germany. And this will all come together, I promise, in what I'm talking about, because basically there's an argument going around in financial circles and otherwise that Germany, symbolically and economically, has hit a wall and is being forced into making a bit of a China pivot toward China. Not because Berlin suddenly loves Beijing, but because Europe's assumptions, the old world order, are collapsing under pressure. And Germany is weak, industrial, no growth, industrial decline, unstable exports, transatlantic relationships that are less reliable than they have been for decades. So Mertz's trip recently to Beijing. Now remember, everybody's been headed to Beijing lately. Carney went there to make some stuff. Ursula? One of the heads of the EU. A lot of European leaders are headed to China. And they're, I say, considering other options, okay, than the United States. And I say they're doing that because we, in the form of President Donald Jayevich are unstable, or unstable is not the right word. Unpredictable. He's all over the map. And I don't say that meanly. It's true. The guy's all over the map. And, one thing the next, and he's too volatile. He calls people, morons and idiots, and is always yelling about this and that, and he's insulting to people. And people don't like to work with that. And that's really, truthfully, my biggest beef with the guy is, you're in a position that people expect some level of decorum out of. And that's my biggest complaint about the guy. I'm allowed to be an asshole personally. That's me. I'm not the president of the United States. But if I was a president, you have to get along a little bit better. I don't have to. It's only affecting me. But when you're acting on my behalf, damn it, quit being so offensive across the board. Just stop it. I mean, we believe you're the greatest person on the planet, okay? Let's just get past that. You are the greatest person on the planet. Quit saying it every 10 seconds and quit beating up on anybody who claims otherwise. Just deal with it and move on, okay? I don't believe you're allowed to do that. Anyway, Mertz's trip to Beijing was different from routine diplomacy. He isn't going alone. He took a major economic delegation. So Berlin and Brussels are seeing this visit as pivotal, maybe even decisive. The claim is simple. China is shifting from important market to strategic necessity for a lot of Europe, especially for Germany, because the U.S.-EU relationship is more strained. Access to the American market can no longer be treated as guaranteed. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that several of the arguments I've heard, this is what other people are saying around the world. And it's important to know what other people are saying around the world. So a big rhetorical move in the commentary that people are giving is remember when, only a couple of years ago, Germany was talking decoupling from China. And now it's reversing course. It's the old 180. Or if you're Kaya Kallas, the 360. Well, I shouldn't say stuff like that. Actually, that was Anna Verbach, wasn't it? That wasn't. Sorry, I didn't. I always beat up on Kallas. I just got in, but that was Annalena Verbach or whatever her name is. Anyway, this reversal of Germany's domestic economic problems are like a profound economic decline and deindustrialization. Shutting down Volkswagen plants? That's unheard of. The argument is that ideology and values talk, which is all over Davos in the last couple of weeks, they can't feed, the Munich Economic Security Conference last week. Oh, geez, global rules-based order. That doesn't help you in economic decline. So ideology and values talk won't feed an export-driven economy. So when factories and supply chains are hurting, such lofty goals are replaced by practical efforts. Raw material, stable supply chain, market access. So Mertz's Beijing trip was less of a grand strategy and more of a forced retreat from the world as it used to be. So economics is a first-order driver. Germany's model has always relied heavily on export and industrial strength. Auto sector has been the backbone that is now facing a serious structural decline. Not just in Europe, but around the world, mostly in China. And that's important. China isn't an external customer anymore. It's a competitor. Well, it is a customer, but not at the level it used to be. That has been eating the margins and market share of traditional European industrial champions. And China remains a huge market, but it's not the market where European firms automatically dominate anymore. So, when you look at that and then you look at the EU's militarization agenda, that Europe can achieve militarization goals. They want to go to war with Russia by 2030. That's a stated goal. with these morons. We want to go to war. And how are we going to go to war if we can't supply ourselves? We can't just keep buying U.S. weapons at triple the price. We got to manufacture our own. And if we don't have any manufacturing capacity, how in the world are we going to do it? If China has all the capacity, we have to switch and make some sort of a trade arrangement with them. And so, you can't talk about strategic autonomy, defense expansion, and geopolitical, issues that you want to control if your economic base is dead. So that's why Mertz would like to seek better terms with China, especially if U.S. tariffs and political friction under Trump reduce European sales opportunities in America. China has to become an alternative outlet. And so this is cold math, this is all it is. And so, but the trip isn't purely economic. They're also trying to figure out they want to be part of something related to Ukraine. And they think that China can put significant pressure on Russia. So Mertz wants to press Beijing about Moscow and the Western strategy, limit their alignment with Russia. They're trying to pick off BRICS countries one by one. They go to India, and that's what's happening. So results are mixed. BRICS isn't fracturing. BRICS isn't fracturing. And if anything, it's, more confident, more assertive because of the shit show going on around the world otherwise. It's as far as trade, and especially in the Trump realm, because it's support or don't support. To me, it's not important. I don't control it, so what difference does it make to me? I don't necessarily dislike, but I don't necessarily like what is going on and what Trump is creating over there. I think he's creating instability. And, maybe that's art of the deal. That's what everybody tells me. Oh, it's just art of the deal. He's making a deal every time he goes somewhere. Well, good for him, but that's making the rest of the world make deals in other places. So divide and conquer, is what the structure has been regarding any BRICS countries. They're trying to make friends with Brazil separately, India separately, China separately. So I read an article yesterday that said that Trump, after he lost this tariff deal, that over the weekend, China, who has been targeted with these tariffs, and that the tariffs are going to be overturned and can't be charged, Trump is scrambling to cover them. But China has already said, well, that means we're going to cancel the deals and go back to the deals that we originally had, especially relative to soybeans. And this was a long article on soybeans. And they said soybean farmers in the United States were just hurting until Trump came along and figured out this tariff deal, and that the tariff deal wasn't necessarily to make money for the United States. It was to guide certain trade in certain directions. And part of that was trying to guide it toward away from Brazil, which is a huge, I'm not sure what's going on. Trying to get some heat going here. Anyway, sorry to interrupt myself. But that after the tariff deal with the Supreme Court, that over the weekend, China canceled a lot of contracts with U.S. soybeans. I don't know the truth of this. I just saw an article on it, and, it may have been clickbait. And I didn't have time to go out and research it, but it would certainly make sense that if they got to pay triple for U.S. soybeans, why wouldn't they go to the bumper crop of Brazil last year in soybeans and buy cheap soybeans from Brazil, which was their intent initially? And so, makes sense to me. So, divide and conquer all these things. Another theme in this was Europe's, independent pole, that they want to be more independent from being under the thumb of America, right? And they're not. They're not independent at all. And so he's described as wanting to, Merz is anyway, as wanting Europe to function as an independent strategic pole in a world that is no longer unipolar. And he's implying his own willingness to create some distance from Washington if necessary. But Merz doesn't want to break the alliance. Europe can't afford it. But so it's more about redefining and rebalancing than outright separation. The example that I heard was that Merz is warning the United States against escalating tariff wars and signaling that Europe will not automatically follow Washington if trade policy remains a geopolitical weapon of choice of Trumpster. So, it's... there's so much going on in this respect. That one court ruling that is where there are a number of questions. So does China see Europe as a serious strategic actor or as a divided and weakened bloc that still depends on America for everything security-wise? It's not just a rhetorical poke in the face. It's the hinge of an argument. If Beijing believes Europe isn't strategically autonomous, I don't believe it is. If Europe cannot credibly act independently, then China has less incentive to make concessions to Germany and more incentive to simply wait out Europe while pursuing its own agenda. And that makes sense to me. And I believe, they're smart enough to play that. And at the deepest level, people are asking whether the center of gravity is really shifting toward Asia and away from the West. I say it is. It might take a long time to get there, but it's going to go. When you talk about de-dollarization, it isn't, the British pound survived for many, many decades after as a command currency, as one of the largest forever. It isn't anymore. The British pound, nobody cares anymore. Everybody's buying the euro or the dollar, and the pound is no longer, after they lost their global influence, which is basically gone, in many realms anyway, their currency stayed around for a long time. And that's the same thing that's eventually, in my opinion, going to happen with the dollar, because people are creating alternative structures. So I may be wrong about that. I guess we'll see in 100 years, long after I am pushing up daisies. So deindustrialization in Germany. Germany can talk values all day long, but its industrial base needs some kind of energy, materials, and markets. And where are they going to get it? They can pay double to Trump, or they can switch. And China, Canada, China, France, China, Eastern Europe, China, Germany, and China, many others, are actually becoming key economic partners. China's belts and roads and all of that stuff. China isn't auditioning to be Europe's partner. Europe is auditioning to remain relevant, because in an increasing world where the Southeast Asia is taking precedence, they aren't. And so this is and an era of globalism declining, one size fits all declining. I'm not so sure that's that it's not going to snowball into a larger and greater collapse in a quicker fashion. So there you have it. So the argument that Germany isn't pivoting toward China, they say that it's not done out of enthusiasm, it's out of necessity. So, and it's based upon Germany's economic slowdown, the broader stagnation hitting Europe. And, if the American market is politically unpredictable and the Chinese market is more stable, and it's massive, it's almost, seriously, it's the largest PPP, purchase parity measure of GDP is China is the largest economy in the world. with what you can buy with your money. China is it, and we're like number 2 or something. So China's export-driven economy needs buyers, and it needs stable supply chains, and it needs access to raw materials, and growth isn't currently coming from inside Europe at all. And so, in my view, the economic argument is that economic survival is pushing the rest of the world eastward instead of towards the U.S. That's what's happening. And we have become an economic warfare type of country, especially under Trump. This is what I'm not saying it's wrong, indifferent, anything, but that's how the rest of the world views it, right? And there's a broader global layer. Again, it's BRICS and the shifting center of gravity in the global economy. Western policymakers approach emerging powers individually, engaging China here, Brazil there, keep pressure on Russia, navigate relations with China in ways that try to prevent them from consolidating into a unified BRICS organization. But that the multipolar shift is accelerating regardless of Western strategy is certainly a valid argument. And, picking them off one by one might work for a while, but it's still, the changes are coming. Non-dollar transactions are growing everywhere. And Asia's economic growth rate outpaces Europe's. Supply chains flow through Asian hubs instead of European hubs. Technology innovation is no longer Western predominated. And if that trend continues, which it will, then Europe has to decide. Does it remain rigidly opposed to the East and has to stay aligned to the West, or do they engage with rising centers of power? And that same thing goes to the discussions I've been having about Carney for a couple of weeks now and what he's doing, because there was some massive discussion about that boy over the weekend. There was some interesting stuff on that. And I wonder if that's my next part, because it was the open-ended questions of BRICS, I think, is where I was going to go after that, because that was the next part. But I might skip it and go on to Carney, because, that part is almost an absolute. I think, I don't know, laying out the case that Europe may be drifting toward China out of necessity, and then discussing the possibility that BRICS does represent a growing multipolar counterweight, like I do. There's another argument entirely, and it goes like this, because I read this too. BRICS is supposed to be a great challenger, kind of an alternative to the G7, a nucleus of a post-dollar, post-Western economic order, but maybe it's not. Maybe it never was. People are going, what? Did you say that, Sam? No, I'm giving you a counter argument. Okay, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, is a group of large emerging economies, and it's growing faster than the traditional Western powers. It's not a military alliance or even a geopolitical bloc. It's a recognition of demographic weight, economic potential, and long-term growth. So over time, it's evolved into something a little more political. The idea being that these countries... Oh, did you see... And by the way, this Jai Shankar, the foreign minister for India, oh my God, he was on the same dais at the economic forum, the security forum in Munich with guess who? I saw this over the weekend. And it was Lindsey freaking Graham. And Graham got up in the middle of the presentation and left. He said his piece, and Jai Shankar started beating up on him. I really wanted to play that whole piece, and I didn't. But he started beating the hell out of him verbally, going, I don't know what you're talking about. And Lindsey Graham got up and left. And it's like, you need to support Ukraine. And they did the same thing to Hillary Clinton. And it took her down to but that one has been more publicized. I think he was the Czech foreign minister. Anyway, I digressed there a little bit, but it was certainly the skeptical view, because we like to go around the world and dictate and dominate and say ridiculous things that people go, what did he just say? And I have no idea what Lindsey Graham is talking about. Well, you always know what Lindsey Graham's going to say. More war, please. We need more. Let's bomb the hell out of somebody. You could just cookie cutter his speech anywhere. But anyway, BRICS has expanded. It represents half the world's population and a significant share of the global GDP. It's like 42% now. And that does matter. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're ready to take over the planet tomorrow. So the core argument is in this second perspective is that BRICS faces structural limitations that mean it's far less capable of reshaping the global systems. So because they have internal divergence. China and India have the long-standing border tensions. Brazil's political direction shifts with each election cycle. Russia's under sanctions. South Africa has domestic economic strain and internal problems, big time. These are not countries that share a unified strategic vision. They are frustrated with Western dominance. That they have, but that doesn't mean they have a coherent alternative. And the other one is the dollar question. So for years, people predicted the death of the dollar. I haven't predicted the death. I've predicted the slowdown of it. The dollar's dominance is tied to what? If you don't understand this, maybe you should. World War II institutions, Bretton Woods, the IMF, the World Bank, deep capital markets, and the sheer size and liquidity of U.S. financial systems. So the argument is straightforward. There isn't a ready replacement. A reserve currency isn't just about trade settlement. It requires trust, deep bond markets, legal predictability, transparency, and scale. The euro can't displace the dollar. The yuan is tightly managed. The hypothetical BRICS currency, which doesn't exist, would require countries to surrender monetary sovereignty to a shared framework. But they haven't done that. Remember, and when I listened to this, I thought it was interesting, but I think he missed the point that there isn't a BRICS currency. They're trying to create a BRICS exchange system, and I've explained how that works before. So I don't believe this guy knew as much or as deeply about what they were trying to create, maybe because he wasn't at a BRICS conference and what they've been trying to create. And it is successful so far. It is the ability to trade in their own currency and not using the dollar. And if they don't use the dollar, it actually props up their own currency when they trade in their own currency. Because why is the U.S. able to do with the dollar and dominate the planet for as long as it has? Is because everybody's using the dollar. So they have to have, we just keep printing more and sending it all around the world. But the more people choose to use their own currency, that means ultimately the less they're going to use of the U.S. dollar. And so we can't finance our growth on the backs of dollars sent abroad. And that's what we've been doing for ever since Bretton Woods. Was that 46 or something? I don't remember that year specifically, so don't quote me on that. So although you can talk about de-dollarizing or reducing your dollar dependence, creating an alternative is a different matter. So even within BRICS, there isn't a unified currency. Trade settlements? Yes. Expanded use of local currency? Yes. But a genuine replacement for dollar dominance? So far, not. This guy made an argument that actually makes some sense, that China towers economically over the rest of all the BRICS countries. And that's probably, well, it is true. And that creates its own friction. Smaller members might want some kind of a situation, but they don't want to replace Washington with Beijing either. And for India in particular, they're the largest country in the world, and they consider themselves a rising civilizational power and the natural leader of the global South. And that doesn't automatically align with China. So the argument is this: is BRICS less a cohesive bloc and more an economic platform, a diplomatic forum where countries signal their dissatisfaction with Western structure, but stop short of binding commitment that truly disrupts the West? And there's also the question, this more importantly for me anyway, is the question of U.S. behavior. The more aggressive Washington talks about punishing BRICS or threatening tariffs or anything about de-dollarization, the more attention and legitimacy it gives to the bloc itself. So public warnings about a BRICS currency elevate the concept, even if the currency is only theoretical. That's hard, isn't it? The U.S. still accounts for roughly a quarter of global GDP. More importantly, it remains central to global capital markets. So the thought is that it's going to be very difficult to step back from that. I agree with that. So, but if BRICS wants to evolve beyond a diplomatic forum, where they're working together, they have to coordinate a monetary policy. They have to integrate their payment systems, and they got to have a deep cross-border capital market, and then shared strategic goals. I say they've got the shared strategic goals for the most part. I say they're creating the integrated payment systems, but taking a long time to do it just because it will. They don't have deep cross-border capital markets, although they are definitely investing in infrastructure where the West, at least in America, we are not. We're not doing anything. Anybody, and I'd love for somebody to tell me I'm wrong in that. Is there any infrastructure stuff going on at all? But I know that changed the topic a little bit. But BRICS will continue to grow in membership and symbolism. But it's not going to automatically translate into power. Right now, especially in Munich, and over the last year, what they've been talking about is changing, modifying, updating, amending the UN, especially the veto powers of certain actors. And I'm not sure that it'll ever happen, but India's been bitching about it forever. When are you going to fix this? We're the largest country in the world, and we don't have a seat at any table. We're the wicked stepchildren over here. We're the evil children that are, wet the bed over here. We're the bedwetters. You won't even let us in the room. And there's a point to that. So the question isn't whether BRICS disappears, it's whether it transforms from a rhetorical symbol of multipolarity into an operational mechanism capable of delivering it. Because, they keep swinging back and forth. So right now that transformation is anything but certain. So if you merge this with what Germany was saying, and about where they're headed to China and they're hedging their bets, Canada hedging their bets, what you can say is on one side, there's an argument that the West is weakening economically, and that's pushing Europe toward China, accelerating multipolarity and strengthening BRICS. But on the other hand, there's an argument to be made that BRICS doesn't have cohesion, lacks monetary integration, lacks institutional depth to displace Western dominance, at least for the foreseeable future. I'm trying to find out when the India, because I believe BRICS conference is in India this year, and I'd love to go. I'm trying to figure out when that is and see what I got to do to get a visa. I have to send away my passport to get a Russian visa again because mine expires in 3 days. So I shall be sending it away again to get a new Russian visa. Anyway. the center of gravity is moving east. The other side says, well, maybe that is, but that doesn't equal governance. That the gravity of economic gravity is moving, but governance is going to stay in Washington. One side can talk about de-dollarization gathering momentum, but the other one says, show me their bond market. Don't show me a press release. One side says multipolarity is solidifying, and the other one says, well, that's fragmentation masquerading as unity. And so this is where it's interesting, in my view. Both arguments can be partially true at the same time. The West is weaker than it was before, but it's still institutionally dominant. BRICS is politically louder, but still in operational realm anyway, somewhat, incoherent's the wrong word, unstable, maybe disorganized would be better. And the dollar is gradually eroding in relative terms, but it's still unrivaled, So the real question isn't about whether BRICS is dead or not. It's about whether global power really is reorganizing in a way that makes traditional U.S. Western dominance less absolute. If anything, I think the way Trump acts internationally is pushing that faster. He's pushing the Carneys and the Merzes and the Macrons of the world into the arms of China and India, and sending them over there. So, and I'm, that's just a function of what he's doing. That's not, I dislike Trump. I don't care. I shouldn't say that. I do care, but it's not like I can control any of it. And I'm not making a judgment except for the way he acts, like I've already done. But I think there's might be a better way to scramble an egg, but perhaps I'm not president. That's possible. And so therefore, that's where the debate is standing. So are we watching the collapse of a system or the slow diffusion of this system, the slow disorganization of it? Is BRICS the embryo of a new order or just a pressure valve for dissatisfaction with an old one? So that's where the debate is right now. And that's where I land, right in the middle of that, and I think it's important to talk about. So if we talk about whether BRICS is rising or stalling, whether Europe is drifting toward China, then, we have to come back to North America, right? And the world order isn't changing because emerging powers are rising. It's changing because traditional alliances are being destabilized from within. And one example that I talk about all the time is Canada, or at least for the last month or so. For decades, the U.S. and Canada have maintained one of the most deeply integrated bilateral relationships in the world. Longest international border unguarded, defense supply chains intertwined, intelligent networks fused. We have Five Eyes, NORAD, jointly managing North American airspace, the longest undefended border in human history. 70% of Canadian exports flow south. It's not diplomatic goodwill, it's structural integration. And now let's talk about these tariffs, to which we started this with, this whole show. The repeated refrain by Trump is that the tariff is a punishment. Tariff is leverage. Tariff is discipline. Tariff is retaliation. And the argument is that this mindset, this permanent transactional posture, fundamentally alters how allies everywhere calculate the risk. Now, you could say, what the hell do we care about Germany hanging out with China? What do we care? They're far away. They don't matter. But Canada's in our backyard. And Canada's right here. So the argument is that this permanent transactional posture alters risk for all of us. So when a country depends heavily on access to U.S. market and suddenly faced with a 25% blanket tariff, threats of economic penalty, question of defense contribution, you're disloyal, and even rhetorical talk of annexation, we're taking Ontario. They're gonna vote to join us. Hey, Governor so and so, wasn't it Trudeau? Is not interpreted as campaign theatrics. It's interpreted as risk, and risk in finance has to be hedged. And so that's how the banker Mark Carney is looking at it. I don't believe he's looking at it emotionally. He certainly wasn't in Davos. He's not talking about it from a standpoint of ideology. Although he prefers democracy in, whatever form that he feels it is today. So when a leader with a background in central banking and crisis management hears persistent threats from Donald Jayevich and sees trade weaponized against his country, the response is not to shout back. He's diversifying. And so his Davos speech, which I shared with you in its entirety, is important in this framing. So public acknowledgement is that the post-World War II bargain tolerating American dominance in exchange for stability is no longer stable because of Trump. That middle powers can no longer assume a predictable behavior from Washington. That economic integration itself can be weaponized. Now, see, it used to be allies didn't bitch about instability or randomness of leadership in America. They just dealt with it because they knew overall they were all together. But under Trump, they don't see that. In the instability before, the failure to enforce rules only applied to other countries. Europe would never say anything about that. But wait a minute, that's not what we do if it's any one of us or the U.S. We only, why are we doing that against, Sri Lanka? Why are we doing that against Morocco? It's like, well, because the U.S. said so. We know you would do it against China, and, we'd be all over, jumping up and down too. But Spain's our friend. Why are you doing that to Spain? Well, they wouldn't say anything, but now they are. And that's the instability now. So joining the European Union Security Action for Europe program, $150 billion defense financing mechanism designed to reduce European dependence on American supply chains. This is the first discussion of all of this. This is Canada becoming the first non-European country admitted to European Union Security Action for Europe. So participating in Eurogroup level discussions reserved for Eurozone members, and without the United States, by the way, and advancing multilateral defense financing structures. They talked about that at the Munich conference last week, too. Canada is reassessing major procurement contracts, submarines, fighter jets. They're looking toward Europe and Asian suppliers rather than defaulting to American manufacturers. So in isolation, each move looks, technical. But if you add them all up, it looks like a redesign, is what I say. And here's the larger strategic tension that connects back to BRICS and what I was talking about, this global shift. If allies are beginning to hedge against America because it's unpredictable, then the shift toward multipolarity isn't necessary. And it isn't necessarily a unified BRICS activity, currency, alternative reserve system. Doesn't matter. It's just diversification away from reliance on the dollar, which is what Canada is signaling big time. There was some argument over the weekend as well about that bridge again, the Gordie Howe Bridge, I think it's called, that Carney and whatever the guy's name, the premier, I think they call him, was it Ottawa? That his saying that they're opening it anyway, and Trump's not going to stop it. We'll see about that. I don't know what's going to happen. But polarity can emerge, or multipolarity can emerge not from coordination, but from everybody hedging their bets. And that's what's going on. So at the same time, the argument doesn't claim that Canada is leaving the United States. I mean, NORAD's continuing, intelligence sharing continues, trade does continue, but the nature of the relationship is definitely changing. Trump, with everything with Trump, is transactional. Relationship is only a transaction. You don't want to have a wife if that relationship is transactional, if you know what I mean. And strange bedfellows, right? If Washington treats alliances as a transaction, allies are going to reciprocate. And that has consequences. So defense supply chains. Once procurement contracts shift toward German, South Korean, Swedish firms, the relationships become embedded for decades. You got maintenance infrastructure that they build. They have training pipelines. Ecosystems adapt, right? And those structures don't revert simply because a future administration softens its rhetoric. Capital is following infrastructure and architecture. So the argument says that tariff-first diplomacy accelerates structural diversification among allies. That's what's going on. And this is where the world order conversation is more serious, because the issue isn't simply whether China rises, it's whether U.S. policy pushes allies toward building parallel arrangements. And it is doing that right now. That's what Canada is doing. No, I don't mean, gee, the sky is falling, everybody get an umbrella, but these are realities, that we are facing. So the Trump doctrine is clear. Trade deficits signify weakness. Tariffs are corrective actions. Economic integration is leverage. Everything with him is leverage. Everything and everyone is transactional. We're not in this because we like you. We're in this because we expect this. And we're not in this because we share common goals. We're in this because you need us more than we need you. So get on board or, get off and fall behind is Trump's continual argument. Now, that's one way to run a railroad. I question whether it's the correct way long term. Everybody says he's just trying to steer this for a little bit and correct all the BS that's happened over the previous years. Well, the strain may be too much. Correction might equal blowing up. I don't know. We shall see. And I'm not claiming I'm God's gift to the planet on understanding these issues, but I certainly see a different point of view than many counterparts. But the counter-argument from middle powers is equally clear. Over-reliance equals vulnerability. According to Trump, it's all transactional, but these guys are, look, if we have to rely only upon you, obviously if we rely and you decide to pull the rug out from under us, look what's happening. Dependence, they have to reduce it. Hedging is a rational decision in that environment. So when both sides adopt transaction logic, alliances lose their strategic elasticity. And the broader implication extends beyond China, right? I mean, Canada, if and especially with China going in, Canada going into China. So if Europe sees tariffs as political instruments too, which they do, if Asian partners see export access as conditional, which they do, if middle powers conclude that U.S. market is no longer reliably open, which they do, then diversification is their own survival strategy. They're trying to survive. They're trying to diversify to de-risk for their own population, their own form of nationalism. Everything Trump is doing, arguably he's doing for us to make America great again, right? Well, wouldn't the other countries necessarily try to make themselves great again, or make themselves or paint themselves in the best possible light for their own children and their own populations? Well, of course, we've seen a rise in nationalism globally, and the diversification is their own survival strategy. Diversification necessarily includes having alternative pathways to get the same thing done. It's not anti-American. It's protectionism of their own brand. So this goes right back to the BRICS debate. Even if BRICS lacks cohesion, even if no common currency emerges, even if dollar dominance is intact, the erosion of trust among Western allies accomplishes something BRICS could never do alone. It's fragmenting the institutional core of the post-war order. Even though the U.S. still represents 25% of global GDP, 75% is still elsewhere. And if that 75% starts to trade more with itself, Europe with Asia, Canada with Europe, India with China, regional blocks cross-linking, which they are, the relative weight of the U.S. declines not through collapse, but through diffusion. And tariffs will accelerate that environment, that diffusion. And there's another structural layer here, energy and technology, the AI race, electrification, data centers. These need enormous energy input. U.S. energy position is strong compared to most countries, but scaling AI infrastructure is going to require sustained power expansion. Other regions, particularly parts of Asia, are building energy capacity at scale. Nuclear everywhere. Russia's building nuclear reactors in India, lots of them. If technology competition intersects with trade fragmentation, which it is, the incentive to be self-sufficient regionally is just going to grow. So that brings us back to the central claim. The world order isn't unraveling in a single dramatic rupture. It's just being reworked, repriced, discounted. Allies are calculating the risks. Emerging powers are testing institutional alternatives. Middle powers are exploring parallel groups. Tariffs might achieve a short-term success in concession, but they also send a long-term signal, and long-term signals alter long-term behavior. So if the most integrated bilateral defense relationship in the world begins building parallel supply chains, and if the closest intelligence partners begin framing the relationship as transactional, and if hedging is normalized, which it's becoming, then the architecture of Western alliance changes quietly and durably for the future. And that change feeds into the broader multipolar debate and continuation. Because multipolarity doesn't require anti-Western bloc, it requires decentralization from the first one, and that's it. It requires middle powers deciding that no single partner is indispensable and that what makes the world great isn't one member. So the shift isn't a dramatic headline, it's a spreadsheet. It's a contract. It's a multilateral financing framework. It's an invitation to a new table of Germany sitting down in China with China. It's a hedge, all of it. So when you combine all of these, Germany recalibrating toward China, BRICS struggling between symbolism and cohesion, Canada restructuring risk exposure in response to tariff politics, and with Trump still rising above it all as the tariff god, he's doubled down. Instead of 10%, let's make it 15 worldwide. And I'll just use a different way. They haven't taken all my tools, and they're dummies anyway, basically. So that's the argument. Now, I want to do this before I leave today. I've been trying to share with you some culture, and I've finished up a tiny bit early, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. And see where I go, because I like music of all kinds and varieties. There's even some country and Western that I like. And I like big band. I like Debussy. I like all kinds of music. And I've been listening. And when I'm riding in my car, I've I can't remember how many songs I have on my iTunes playlist, but last time I remember looking, it was about 18,000 songs of different varieties, and so I get a lot of variety that just pops up. And one of them came up that it's a Russian song. Again, it's a Russian one, and I forgot all about this song. And this is a great. It's a really good song. I like it, and you won't understand a word of it if you don't speak Russian. But it's I like the beat of it, and I'm going to, if I can find the damn thing, I'm going to share it with you just because. And if you don't like the beat, well, I apologize up front. That's how it goes sometimes. Here, let's see. There it is. I have found it. And I like this song. So here we go. We're going to play it. No interruptions from the old Sam. And then we'll ease on out of here after that.
Разведены мосты,
все спят.
неужто это ты?
Да, я
Холодная весна,
пустяк.
а почему одна?
Вот так,
Не против провожу,
давай,
смотри, года бегут.
пускай.
А сколько же прошло,
7 лет,
уже почти светло.
рассвет,
Как будто мы с тобой и не было разлук. Как будто той весной мы не расстались вдруг. Как будто ты ждала
как будто ты искал
своей любви причал. Как будто мы с тобой и не было разлук. Как будто той весной мы не расстались вдруг. Как будто ты ждала
как будто ты искал
своей любви причал.
Ну вот уже мой дом,
Как жаль,
а может быть зайдем
на чай
на стрелки, не гляди,
пойдем
немного посидим.
вдвоем.
Для нас такой урок,
Смешно,
ты тоже одинок.
давно,
Любовь не обмануть,
ну да,
а если все вернуть?
назад. Как будто мы с тобой и не было разлук. Как будто той весной мы не расстались вдруг. Как будто ты ждала
Как будто ты искал
своей любви причал. Как будто мы с тобой и не было разлук. Как будто той весной мы не расстались вдруг. Как будто ты ждала
как будто ты искал
своей любви причал. Как будто мы с тобой и не было разлук. Как будто той весной мы не расстались вдруг. Как будто ты ждала
как будто ты искал
своей любви причал. Как будто мы с тобой и не было разлук. Как будто той весной мы не расстались вдруг. Как будто ты ждала
как будто ты искал
своей любви причал.
I like that song. That is Irina Kruk and Alexei Briantsev. And that's from their album Любимые песни, which is Favorite Songs. And that one is called Как будто мы с тобой. As if we were still together, basically. And it's kind of a cool thing. It's basically a guy and a girl going through a park or something, and they bump into each other, and they haven't seen each other in 7 years, and they used to date, and they talk about, hey, what's going on? Can I walk with you? And then they walk, and then they're going, why aren't we together again? Basically, and it's I just like the beat in it was an interesting song. Anyway, I hope you don't dislike that. I do that every once in a while. Let's throw out some songs out there that I particularly care for, and this was one of them. And they have another one called something about we've vdvayom, we are together, and they have something else. And I really like that one too. But that's a pretty good song, and I always had this complaint about some U.S. artists. I always used to really like who was the guy that spoke really deep voice, and he just strange song, just really weird. I wish I could remember who he was, but they had maybe 1 or 2 albums, but he always spoke really, really deep and just strange topics that didn't necessarily make a lot of sense. And man, I wish I could remember what it was, but he'll cycle through on my God Shuffled His Feet, whoever that guy was. After 7 days, he was quite tired, so God said, wanted to have a picnic or something else after that. And anyway, that guy I always liked to listen to as well, but all of his songs tend to sound the same because he has that one dramatic voice. Well, these guys, Krug and Bryancev, their songs tend to sound the same, and they always play off each other, and they've got those. And so I've got a couple of favorites, but it's not like I'll listen to them all the time because they kind of sound all the same, kind of like the God Shuffled His Feet dude. And although I really like the songs, I'm not sure I could handle 10 of the same exact song. Anyway, I believe that is going to end it for me today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Wait a second. Look at this. Hold on. Check this out. Let's do this for just a second, just because I saw it. Here's another one. This is a football game.
Священная наша держава, Россия, любимая наша страна, могучая воля, великая слава, твое достояние на все времена. Славься.
That's like watching, for me, that's like watching, the hell was her name? The one who died, that had such a beautiful voice. And she would go out at a football game or wherever. Oh my God. And you'd listen to it, and it just, it's freaking awesome. And here she is out there doing the same thing. They do the same thing culturally that we do in other parts of the world. And so it's interesting to see that stuff. And that is the Russian, what do they call it? National anthem. That's the Russian national anthem being sung at looks like it's Club Moskva. Looks like it's the Russian national soccer team playing. And stadium's full. It's a big-ass stadium full of people. They do the same stuff that we do. And watching it is pretty cool. And they have the same or better cars, the same sorts of things. They have going through the stand, there's a guy with some long hair. They have the same types of... Anyway, we're far more similar than we are not or dissimilar. That's what I have to say about it. Anyway, that's all we've got today. I am Samuel Trapp. Happy Monday to every single one of you. And I've very, very much enjoyed my weekend. It's a freaking cold still in the real estate of the art studio, freezing my little doodads off, and I don't really like that. It's not good. And I'm wearing a coat even, and I'm still sniffling. So it's not good. Anyway, Join me again tomorrow. Join me every day at the Lake Ozark Real Estate of the Art Studio. You can listen to all of our recorded shows at demradio.com/podcast. You can go out to internationalflavor.com and get all of my shows and repeat them because we like it when you do that. You have a very nice day. And once I can figure out what in the hell I'm doing, I can log out of here and see you later. Thanks for being with us this morning.